Hello everyone, welcome back to another devlog where I go over my progress last week and a half for my shooter game I'm building with Unreal Engine 5. Okay, so the first thing I did last week was to spawn hit number tags the moment we hit the enemy. So let me just show you how it happens real quick. So see, if I hit the enemy like this, we can see how much damage we dealt. We have different colors for the amount of damage that they deal. So how do we do this? Well, we have a widget blueprint right here that gets spawned every time we hit an enemy. But how do we get this number to be the damage that we want? So basically, this number is bound to a variable called damage. And where do we get the damage from? We get the damage from the parent class hit number widget, which is a C++ class that I have created. And what happens is, once we hit the enemy, we call this function show hit number, and here we pass in the damage, and we have a widget instance that we have created the moment we have hit the enemy, and we set its position, etc., and here we go to widget and we set the damage, which is a public variable. If I go to widget, hit number widget, you can see that we have this public variable and it's visible anywhere. Since it is visible anywhere, your property, we can access it easily from the blueprints. So that's how we set that damage. That's all. There's also an animation that gets played. So if I go to designer tab, go to animations, I have this animation called slide and fade. So as you can see, it slides and fades. Similarly, I can set the color using a variable that I set from C++. So I have this function get hit number, text box, and opacity that I use to set the color. Well, so I have a bunch of variables here, hit color 1, 2. They're each a different color that I set here, and they are all set based on this variable called damage tier. Well, how do I calculate damage tier? If I go back to enemy.cpp and in the show hit number function, you can see that damage tier is actually just a simple calculation that gives us some simple calculation based on damage that gives us if damage is between 0 and 19, it's tier 1. If damage is 20 and 39, it's tier 2, and so on. So based on that, we get all these integers. Then I set those to individual colors, and that is how I get different colors every time. That is how I get different colors depending on the amount of damage that we hit. And the reason I make this calculation of damage tier in C++ is I think it's better to use C++ when I have to do math, and it's better to use blueprints when I for example, set color like this, because I can just come here and pick the color I want very easily from the editor. So that was the first thing I implemented. The next thing was making sure enemies can use weapons too. And the reason for that, initially when I implemented this game, the logic of firing a weapon was super closely coupled with the player character. So the reason shooter character was very coupled with weapon firing is because initially I was following this course to build out the foundation of the game, which is a great course, by the way. I would recommend to anyone who is serious about learning Unreal Engine. But one thing with this course is that the enemies in this course are all melee enemies, so they don't shoot at you. But the enemies that I want, well, I want both types of enemies. I want enemies that do melee, and I want enemies that also shoot at you. So I wanted to be able to reuse the weapon class for the enemies as well. So it took me a little bit of time to decouple the logic, but now everything I think is fine for the most part. So if I go to weapon class, you can see that all the firing logic, at least the most important parts, are in the class. Previously it was in the shooter class, but now I have moved it to this class. And if I go to the pull trigger function, you can see that we do a lot of things here. Now, one thing that I have to differentiate between the enemy and the player, if I'm shooting as the player, I want to get where the camera is pointing at. Whereas if I'm shooting, if the enemy is shooting, I want to get, well, the enemy doesn't have a camera, so I want to get where the enemy is looking actually. So how do I differentiate that in the weapon class? So in the pull trigger function, which is called when the player decides to shoot, we have a lot of stuff here, but we have this, which is the important part, is the get fire hit result. This is where we essentially do the line trace. So let's go there. It's actually right beneath it. And I was trying to go using F12. Anyways, we're in the get fire hit result function. Now that's the I think that's one of the few parts where it's different. The implementation is different between enemy and the shooter. Because if it's the shooter, so, and how do we decide that if this action is called from the shooter or the enemy? Well, we can just look at the owner of our weapon. And thanks to Unreal, that is quite easy. We just call this function get owner. We try to cast it to a shooter character. If so, shooter character, I have a function there that handles tracing under the crosshairs, basically tracing under the camera. And if not, we get the owner, we try to cast it to enemy. And if we are successful, that means the owner is the enemy, then we do a line trace from enemy's viewpoints. Well, that's how I did the line trace, and now the shooting mechanics is less integrated with the shooter character, and it would be relatively easy for me to implement enemies to shoot using this logic, using this class. Now, the next thing that I did was to import a melee enemy, because I decided that after all this work with the shooting mechanics and the shooting enemies, I decided to actually keep it on hold for a while and focus on the melee enemies. So I imported my first melee enemy assets, and I used Epic Games Paragon assets. They're great. So let me show you the enemy real quick. These little guys are, for now, the melee enemies. Maybe I'll add further. So these are from Paragon. Then I simply added a simple AI. There's a simple logic where it has two patrol points and it moves back and forth. If we're in attack range, it obviously tries to attack to us, and there's a little bit of stun logic. And if we shoot at it, and if we are able to stun the enemy, it stops for a little while. This is actually all this logic is from the Udemy course, the tutorials that I was talking about. So let's see this in action. So here we go, the enemy is approaching us because we're inside the attack range. And we shoot the enemy, we're able to stun, and it stops for a while. Now the game is a little laggy at this point because I have a lot of background processes going on at the same time. I'm also recording this video. And the next thing I did was implement attacking for the enemy. So, by the way, this little sphere means that where in the attack range the enemy can attack us. And this large sphere is called an agrosphere, means that the moment we're inside this large sphere, the enemy is going to get aggressive basically and chase us, and once it's close enough is going to try to attack us. So how this works is, so we're in the bigger square, it's chasing us, and now it's close and it misses a few times, and now it's attacking us because we're inside that square. And the way this works, all of the logic behind this, like most of the logic here, is tied to an animation montage. Let's open that up. It has a lot of stuff in it because it has a lot of functionality actually. Let me just stop this for a second. And so what happens is we have certain notify events here. This first notify event makes sure that the right weapon collision, so there's a collision box. There's a collision box near this weapon that I have added. So this is the collision box. This collision box gets activated. And once the attack ends, it gets deactivated. We have a little particle effect here called trail. We play that particle effect. As you can see, that there's a little bit of a visual effect going on there. So that's the particle effect. And we have a sound that attack Q, this is actually the sound, the swiping sound that we hear. Now, we have a couple different attacks here. Attack A, attack B, attack C, and how do I decide which attack to play? Well, if I go to behavior tree, here I have a behavior tree task called enemy melee attack. If I go into it, what we do is we first get a hold of the enemy and we call this function called play attack montage. The target is enemy melee. Enemy melee is a class that I have in C++. Let's go there. Enemy melee. By the way, enemy melee inherits from the enemy class because I have two different enemy types. I have an enemy melee and an enemy shooter. So if I go to enemy melee and if I go to this function play attack montage, we basically play this attack montage. But before this attack montage takes a section name. The section name is basically either attack A, attack B, attack C, whichever one that we want to play. Now, how do we get that? Well, we get that from the function get attack montage section name. Well, this is also in C++, and there's a little bit of a string manipulation that's going on here. So we have a string called section string, and it's only attack underscore. Then we have a section number that is a random number between 1 and 6. And then we convert that random number to a letter. So if it's 1, we convert it to A. If it's 2, we convert it to B. This is the line of code that does it. And then we add it to our section string. So basically, depending on this random number, we either have like attack A, attack C, attack D, whatever, right? And based on that random section name, we play that attack montage. So each time the enemy is hitting us, is playing a random attack animation that are all defined in the animation montage. Lastly, I have a simple health logic for the player. I think this is very straightforward now, and there are a lots of resources that you can check to implement a simple health logic. But well, basically, enemy deals us damage, and I have a little health bar at the bottom left of the screen And that's all there is to it. I haven't implemented death yet, so the moment our health is 0, nothing happens actually. And lastly, I added some sound and visual effects to the enemy attack. So as you can hear, the moment enemy attacks us, we have this little hit sound that's a little bit of a, I guess, like a blood sound, and we have a little bit of blood popping out. And the way I implemented blood is, so I have this blood particle asset, and the moment our enemy, this little box on the enemy weapon, collides with our player, we go to this function. And there's a lot of parameters this function actually takes, but not all of them are actually useful, and it cost me a little bit of time understanding that, because the moment that weapon collision box overlaps with the player, we get into this function, right? Actually with anything, not just the player, but we get into this function. And we have a hit result here. And I thought that this hit result also contained information about the location of where the collision happened, basically. But it turns out that by default this sweep result variable is not filled in. So I thought, oh, okay, maybe it's for us to fill in and hit result, right? Maybe we'll have to do a line trace of some sort. But we can't do that too, because it's const. So it's const, we cannot change it, but by default it is not filled in with any information. So why it's there? Anyways, it took me a lot of time to try to figure that out and try to see why it's not working, because I just assumed that would contain information about the hit, about where the collision happened, but it didn't. So what I did is I implemented my own hit result. I do a line trace from the collision box on the enemy weapon to the actor, which is basically the player at this point, and with that I call hit player. And here we basically apply damage, play impact sound, and play blood particles at the location of the line trace that I did, basically. And I just set a random rotation. And I play the blood particles at the transform that I set here. So that's how I play blood particles. So as you can see, it plays at wherever the enemy hits, but it plays at a random rotation. So that's all for this week and a half. See you next week, probably. And at some point I'm planning to do like a bigger devlog where I go over the whole functionality that I have so far in this game. So I'll do like a 2-month update. So from the time I start to the 2-month window, I'll just go over what I have so far in the game. And stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching. Ciao.